Guys, let's do this. So, hello everyone. Welcome to another AMA session. As usual, all the questions that we're going to be asking today have been submitted from our community, which you can be a part of by simply going to growthhackers.com, where you find a lot of case studies, AMAs, webinars, courses, articles, and most importantly, growth folks from all around the globe. So today I have the pleasure of welcome to our AMA session, Sandhya Ganesh. So Sandhya is actually the currently user growth product lead at Tinder. And prior to that, she was also a senior PM at Amazon and Landing Club. She has launched and scaled multiple products from all kinds of audiences. And there's definitely a lot we can learn from her today. So without further ado, I present to you all Sandhya Ganesh. Welcome, Sandhya.
Thank you so much, Pedro. Thank you for having me, Growth Hackers. Hi, everyone. Looking forward to answering some of the questions all of you have, and then connecting with you over the chat. Little bit intro about myself.
Yes.
I'll start from the beginning. I started my career in consulting at Deloitte Consulting, and I actually worked in multiple job functions. I have done software engineering, then I moved to consulting, and then I did product. And after several years at Deloitte, I decided I wanted to move more towards like tech product, and that's when I joined Blending Club. Post which I joined Amazon, and most recently like Tinder, where I've been for like over 3 years. And throughout my career, I've worked across like large companies, mid-sized companies, and then I've also worked across multiple product domains, ranging from like internal products, machine learning products, consumer products, and now growth products. So yeah, that's been a little bit of my journey, and it's been a fun one with a lot of learning along the way.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Sandy. And it's funny because I used to be a user, and I actually got to know my currently wife, my now wife, through Tinder. So I'm curious
Amazing.
to see from the other side of the table how that works out. Yeah. So let's start out with with Jamie's question, which is a common one that we constantly get, which is like, how does a role of a user growth product lead differs from a traditional PM role?
That's a great question. I think there are a couple of key differences that I would call out. I think as a user growth product leader in general, as a growth product manager, our primary goal is to move very important like business metrics. So for example, can we grow new users? Can we grow our active user base? Can we retain those users? Can we engage those users? And can we monetize them, right? So these are very key business metrics that growth teams are tasked with moving. So
Mm-hmm.
what that means is we also need to be pretty quick with high velocity in our experimentation, where we're able to identify opportunities that really stick and sort of double down on those, and then learn from the ones that don't work and pivot. But we want to be able to do this pretty quickly, so there is a lot of sort of importance to rapid experimentation, rapid learning when you're on a growth team. And I think lastly, on a user growth side, I would say I think this is again true for any growth PM, but you don't many times you don't own an area within your product, right? You own the funnel, you own
Yeah.
giving the best onboarding, best retention, activation, and best sort of engagement experience, and you're optimizing on top of features that already exist. So you need to have strong relationships and the ability to influence multiple teams, because you're going to be partnering with them.
Yep.
Now, if I just flip and look at traditional product managers, many times, again, obviously there is a lot of different types of product management, as I mentioned, B2B, internal, data-driven, consumer. But in general, what I have, based on my experience, what I've seen is traditional product managers, they're focusing on improving the core product capabilities of a product that will deliver consistent value to your users.
Yep.
And many times the length of those product delivery and those capabilities are slightly longer than what you would see when running growth experiments. Also, again, depends on team to team, company to company, but many times the focus area is kind of defined. So say if you're you're a core PM, maybe working on say news feed, for example. Like many times that's like your focus area and you're constantly trying to make that experience better. And lastly, I would say in terms of metrics, I've seen a lot of core PMs focus on, usability, feature usage, customer satisfaction. Obviously, those kind of tie into retention, because if you don't have a good product, you won't get retention. But I think those are the kind of metrics I've seen a lot of them focus on.
Yeah, it makes tons of sense. And I want to stay on that subject a little bit as like a follow-up personal question of mine, because and the question is actually like, did you join Tinder already in a growth role, or did you actually evolve internally and landed in a growth role? And to explain the reasoning behind my question is because we got like a past AMA guest mentioning that for like if you're building a growth team from scratch and starting out, like building the mindset and the entire methodology, etc., it's probably best to get someone who is already working at the company and already know folks from other areas, precisely because like, as you mentioned, it's like cross collaboration with different teams will be a core aspect of everything that you do, right? So if you already get to know them and know exactly like who you can go after if you need anything, it might be easier to get things out of the ground.
Yeah. And just so that I've understood your question, you're essentially asking if I joined directly in a product role or if I actually moved or transition into like post like joining the team.
Yeah, if you join like to the product team and then went to become a growth product role, or if you went directly to the growth role.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of both, and I'll explain why.
Yeah.
So, and I'll give a little bit of context, right? So, when I was at Lending Club, I was actually leading marketing tech initiatives. What that meant is like, what are the different tools, a lot of different capabilities that we could build in order to support our marketing team, so we can optimize on our return on ad spend for different marketing channels. And then how can we personalize like the web experiences, right? So I did have like a little bit of like experience in like the growth space, in the sense that I understood marketing tech really well. I understood like landing page personalizations and what's the connection between marketing to product experience. So that's what led me to join Tinder in a similar role, where I was actually focused more on marketing tech, and I was especially focused on an internal tool that was like powering a lot of our CRM initiatives, but it was more of like a tool sort of product. But the way it evolved is then I had to create like an in-app notification center within the app that required a little bit of tooling, but it also required like thinking about like the consumer experience of what that in-app notification would be, what are the different kinds of messages we would send, and what are the goals in terms of like, do we want this to be for new users, do we want this to be users who are like already in the app, but we want to give them more success. So I started thinking in that realm, and I actually led that entire product. And then post that, I actually pivoted to like pure user growth, where we worked on like multiple user growth specific strategies that range from like say onboarding, activation, incentivization, virality, things like that, and referrals, right? So that was like my transition journey within sort of Tinder. But like to answer your question in simple terms, I did have some background of like some of the growth product, but actually joined as part of like another growth platform team, and then I pivoted to pure user growth.
Got it. Honestly, it sounds super fun of a journey. A lot of fun stuff to work on. Yeah, all right. So, and one last like follow-up question on that, and it's okay if we cannot address it. We don't want to touch on sensitive information about Tinder, like, but overall, how does the growth team's structure? Is it like inside the product team? Is it a standalone unit? Does it belongs to marketing? In terms of like, where do you guys sit at the organization chart?
Yeah, I will state, like, I'll answer at a high level. So we are part of the
Yep.
product team. And then we do have like the different functions that are part of like, that have their own streams, but we work closely with them. For example, we work closely with like marketing, we work with data science, we work with design, we work with engineering, of course, and we work with our partnerships team. So they're all individually sort of like part of their own functions.
Yeah.
and we are part of the product function, but for like an initiative, for a growth initiative, like we all work collaboratively. So there's always like one lead from each of these functions.
Yep, love it. All right, awesome. So moving along, one from the others, which is we constantly also get that, and I know that like Tinder is usually mentioning every successful guide about PLG that I have ever read. So the question is the definition of PLG subjective to each organization? And if so, does the definition actually evolves based on the stage of growth that the company is in? So I know that you have multiple experiences in different companies, in different growth roles. I would love to get your take on that.
Yeah. I think I would say the definition is subjective as you go from company to company, and it does evolve from what I have seen based on the stage of the company. So, for example, like if it is a startup, right? Like you're more focused on creating an experience to truly validate that that's a good product market fit for whatever audience you're building that product for, and you're more likely focused on at least getting new users to like start using that product and adopting that product so you can learn and make that product better. Because if there is no new users, I don't think like a startup is going to like continue to get funding, right? And plus you won't be able to understand like how well your product is sort of delivering to expectations of that audience. So I think maybe you're more focused on user acquisition. And then say if it's in a growth stage where say you've already found your product market fit, maybe you have a smaller like you have a smaller cohort of users that are using your product and they're retaining, at a fairly good rate. That's when you're like, okay, you know what, there is a market there for my product. Now how can I grow it, right? And at that point, like many times, I've seen companies focus on how can I like expand the use cases for my specific like audience better, and how can I focus on not just growing new users, but how can I grow the customer lifetime value of that user, right? Because if you're just getting users through the door but they're not constantly retaining, using, engaging with your product, it's going to like kind of your retention curve is going to die down after a point. But if you're actually like focusing on bringing in quality users who are going to have a larger like LTV, it's going to be good for the user, and then potentially for especially marketplace products, good for the entire ecosystem, of users within your product. So I would say the focus is more on strengthening the use cases within your segment and like focusing more on bringing quality users who have high LTV in the growth stage. And
Yep.
then I think when you mature further, you're looking to further expand, right? So it's more of like, how can I get into potentially adjacent markets? And how can I do market development in that space to grow my sort of, product further? How can I maybe expand into multiple geos? Maybe you started just in US, but now you want to think about, is there a fit internationally for my product? And if yes, what countries can I expand into? And then very important thing, like obviously any business needs to make money.
Yep.
So how can I monetize my product? How can I like convert free to paid users, or how can I sort of cross sell, upsell like my products to like, deepen the monetization per user? So I think those are some of the things that you might think about in mature companies.
I love it. Yeah, it makes tons of sense. And it's the perfect segue for the next question, which is how do you put user acquisition growth and user retention to work together? So they seem like pretty not distance, but different subjects. So, and you mentioned there is a lot of cross collaboration and like in different teams at Tinder. So how do you make that work?
Yeah, I think this is a fun topic, and this is one I feel like I'm sure all growth PMs debate quite a bit. Like it's almost like
Yes.
chicken and egg sometimes. Do you need to get more new users first and then focus on retention, or do you need to like retain them and then get more users, later?
Hmm.
So I think my POV on this, again, it totally depends on the type of product it is, but typically I feel both of these need to go hand in hand, because you can't get new users through a leaky bucket. So say if people are coming and they're just like churning pretty quickly and you don't have retention, then bringing in new users is of no value because you're actually not growing technically, right? Like, so it doesn't make sense. But at the same time, many times, as I mentioned, especially for products that benefit from network effect, like for example, Facebook, right? Where with every new user, the value to the existing user increases, right? In that case, like you do need the users to come in order to retain your users, because your network value increases. The user is more likely to get whatever they want, better outcomes, that is going to make them retain better. So the way I like to think about it is, first I like to always focus on, do we have a good product? Do we have a good product that is sticky enough for our core audience to come in, use it, and have some consistent like engaging patterns? If yes, then means we have a product that works. Obviously it has a lot of optimization opportunities, but at its core it works. And so can we bring in like more users to be able to like use this product and to benefit from this product, right? So that's how we grow. And as new users come in, we are also like are focusing on, okay, what optimizations can we make? How can we segment different types of users? Are there specific things that we need to do differently for one segment versus the other? So I think that's how I like to think. So we think of the entire strategy in tandem, but which ones we prioritize would totally depend on like what is most important at that given point.
It makes tons of sense, yeah. And like in the past question, we mentioned about product market fit, and this one we mentioned about like having a good product first.
Yeah.
Like our founder Chanel, he came up with the PMF survey, so you can interview and trying to kind of like measure if you have found product market fit. Would you say that like having a good product in your guys' definition is precisely that, like being able to like the PMF metric, or how do you measure if you do have a good product or not?
Yeah. I think that's a great question. I do personally think that it does go hand in hand. It is kind of like the same. And the way
Yeah,
I would measure simply is, are users engaging and are they coming back to use it? And now coming back metric or retention metric again could vary depending on the product, because the frequency of use could vary. Like for example, if you take a tax product, people come once a year, versus
yeah,
if say you take like, I don't know, a food delivery product, maybe you want your power users to come like a couple of times a week, right?
yeah,
So that could like totally sort of vary, but there is some measure of, okay, can I get my users to experience the core value prop first? And if yes, are they willing to come back? If they're coming back, it means there is something sticky there, right? And obviously we
obvious.
also use user research and like sort of understand like what's the perception in the market, how are they perceiving the value they're getting from a product. But I think at its core, like I like to see retention as one way to
Yeah,
like evaluate product market fit.
yeah, couldn't agree more. And that's also a perfect connection for Lois' question, which is like, what process do you go through to actually uncover the aha moment? And how do you map out those activation metrics? Is there any specific secret sauce that you guys use?
This is like a very interesting topic. I have like gone a lot of back and forth on this topic, like just during my work and even outside. Like it's a very interesting, very important topic within growth. And I'll just say that I've used a lot of frameworks that Reforge, which is like one of like these platforms that offer a lot of like these growth frameworks, like has provided, which is very very effective. But what has like really sort of worked for me from whatever I've experienced is a couple of things, right? So, firstly, before we talk about the process to uncover aha moment, like what is aha moment, right? At its very like basic level, aha moment is the time when like your user is hiring your product to do a job for them, right? At the end of the day, and the moment they realize that, okay, your product actually does the job for them effectively, and they're like, oh, okay, that's nice. I want to use it. That is the moment where, you've reached your aha, where they're actually being like, okay, you know what? This value delivers what I want, or this product delivers what I want. So that's the aha moment. And again, that could be very different depending on like the product, the user journey, and everything. So I think the first step is to like do workshops and have your team come together and talk about what is it that my product is trying to do for my user, and what is that moment that will make them feel that, okay, my product is meeting that, whatever they're looking for. For example, like I love traveling, so I'll give an Airbnb example. As a host, I'm looking to get like very nice accommodations, right? Very unique accommodations, and be able to like find that super easily. So maybe if I go into Airbnb and I'm, finding a unique accommodation and making my first booking, maybe that's my aha moment where I'm like, oh, I don't need to use hotels anymore. Can I just go to Airbnb and I can find the best unique accommodations? And it's also like at a reasonable price. That's my aha moment. So like going through that whole workshop with your team is very, very effective to qualitatively understand what's that moment. And obviously you can partner with a user research team, and if you have like any focus groups, like kind of validate like the way you're thinking, if it's true or not. But once you have done that, you understand what's that moment, then you need to think about what's the metric that actually helps me measure if users are reaching that moment or not. And that could be a certain step that gets completed in your onboarding. That could be a certain action the user has taken. That could be like a feature that is being used. Again, that could vary depending on your product. But I think that's how you need to map. And one thing that's very important is once you have that metric, I think you also need to understand how frequently the user needs to sort of do that in order to reach their aha moment, and what's the time frame. So for example, if I use Spotify, right? Maybe if a new user comes in, maybe they're discovering like their favorite top artist song, like a Taylor Swift song, and they save it, right? Maybe doing it once is not going to like, blow their mind and be like, oh, this is the music platform I want to use. Maybe like, they are able to do that 10 times and they're like, okay, you know what? Spotify gets it right every single time, right? This is great. So you need to understand if it's 10 times, if it's 5 times, it's 6 times, the user needs to like discover and save something to their playlist to reach that aha moment. And then in what time frame? Like if it takes them 6 months to do that, maybe the user is gone by then. Maybe it needs to happen within the first week, because music is a very frequent usage product where you probably listen to music every single day. So the duration in which that needs to happen is lower. So I think that's how you will like figure out the metrics. If you have to summarize, you first do a workshop to figure out qualitatively what's that moment where your user will feel your product is solving for their needs. And then once you've identified that, what's the metric or step that maps to it? And then what would be the number of times the user needs to do that action and in what time frame? And that's how kind of you come up with your metric. And I would say this is not going to be a one and done thing. You need to experiment different, like, activation metrics, especially with that frequency and, the timing that I spoke about. And then finally, you would have some sort of correlation between people who are meeting that aha moment and people who are retaining better. And that's when you can be like, okay, this is the aha moment for our product.
Yeah, I love it. And you might have already answered most of this next question on this past answer already, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So Tiago asked, what are the essential high-level components of a good onboarding process for a B2C mobile app? And I feel like this one you covered quite well already, but what is the analysis framework that you use to know what to improve or change in the user onboarding? There's probably like, we still have 35 minutes left, so you can, for this question, it can be pretty much an essay on its own.
Yeah, I can maybe try to answer this pretty quickly. And actually ties well to the activation question we just spoke about, right? Like, so once you've identified your activation moment, again, this is a great framework that Reforge like kind of talks about, is like your setup moment, right? Like how can you do all the right setup in order to be able to experience that aha moment? And onboarding is like a very important aspect of it. So say, for example, going back to the Spotify, if I want to like discover, music and like save it, like I need to first be able to create an account. And then in that account, maybe I'm telling what kind of genre of music that I like, what are maybe some of my top artists, right? those are all like setup moments. So you need to backtrack and be like, okay, this is what my product is trying to do for my user. This is the moment where they realize the value of the product. But these are the different steps that they need to take in order to be able to experience that pretty quickly. And then you kind of figure out, okay, based on that, these are the different steps that I would need to include in my onboarding, right? And I think I feel onboarding is so important because it kind of sets the stage on what to expect in the app. The type of questions you ask, like if you ask a very nuanced question, maybe the user expects that, hey, my first page for discovering music is actually already tailored to what, based on whatever I answered in my onboarding. Versus if you ask very generic question, there might be a different expectation. So I think onboarding is super important in terms of setting expectations that your user will want to see, and then you meeting that, in that first moment to reach aha. And I think one last thing I would say when you're defining onboarding process is many times we ask the users for like so many things. It's important to tell them why. Why do you need to give me your date of birth? Why do you need to give me your top artist? Okay, so the user is more likely to take that step because they've understood what they will get if they give that information. So I think, yeah, these are some very important steps. And I think the second part was just like evaluating the
Yeah,
metric.
what is the analysis framework that you use to know what to improve or change in the onboarding process, in the user onboarding?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be as simple as first, you ship this out, with all this thought process, and then you're just looking at your entire onboarding funnel. You're seeing where the drop-offs are happening, and you need to be able to have strong hypotheses on, hey, why is my user dropping off at this particular step, and then you need to be able to run different experiments to validate which of your hypotheses is true, and then you keep like optimizing on it till you reach a point where your onboarding conversion rate is at a really good like industry standard for your product. So I think that's like the generic framework for
Yeah,
analysis.
perfect. Yeah. And just for the audience to know, I will soon get to your questions on the chat. So feel free to drop them out over there. Just going through the list of the questions that came from the community first. We'll probably not have enough time to go through them all, but I'm picking a few ones. So feel free to share your questions on the chat while we go through the list. And since we just touched on onboarding users, Jacob asked, like, how do you tailor user activation flows for different user segments, such as like new users versus a returning user?
Yeah, that's a great question. The first step I would say is to be able to like segment the users and to understand what are some of the key differences. And it's always not as easy to do because we have very little information about the user many times when they have just started, like, say, onboarding. But in the case of new versus returning users, we have a lot more information about returning users than we have about new users, because returning users are people who have given a chance to your product and for some reason they have actually like churned, or they have become inactive, or they've not come into the app. And so I think we still know how they used your product, how much time they used it for, when did they drop off. So there is a lot more we can do in terms of personalizing like that particular experience. I would say like a couple of things that at least I have looked at is, when you say returning users, there are different types, right? Did they totally go ahead and delete your app? If they did, many times apps have this deletion flow where you can ask the user what did not work out for them, why they're deleting. So that's a very good data point you have. So say if someone says, hey, I'm deleting this app because I was looking for this and I did not find it, and say maybe you built a feature capability that caters to it, it's a good hook for you to re-engage that user, because now you have actually built something that will solve for the problem that was not solved back then because of which they churned. The second could be maybe some users are like just inactive because of they used your product, now they need a break, and then they will come back. And for example, especially in the dating world, right, like it's not that users use the product like every single day, like for like 365 days of the year. That will be like too taxing. So many times like users might want to use the product, take a break, and then come back. Or sometimes users, maybe they found someone, right, where we actually succeeded and that's why they churned. So that's a good churn. So I think we'll need to uncover, even within returning users, what are the different types of like drop offs or churn. What is a good churn versus bad churn? And even with bad churn, which ones can be totally controlled? And then the next time that they come in, it's always good to recognize the user that, hey, welcome back. We saw that, uh, obviously we won't say that to the user in those words, but hey, welcome back, Pedro, versus like me treating you as like, I don't know you. And then kind of maybe surfacing experiences that would be valuable to them. So if someone told me, hey, I just needed a break and that's why I'm going to like, delete this app. And then you come back and say, hey, I hope like, welcome back and hope you're ready to like, find someone very interesting now. Maybe do you want to like have a clean slate, or do you want to like pick up from where you left off? Like even just having that kind of experience for the user makes them feel like, okay, this product knows who I am and is actually taking my past experiences seriously to tailor this experience and personalize it for what will work for me. So I think those are some of the steps that we take in terms of tailoring the experience.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned about like gathering feedbacks from the cancellation flow, for example, right? So I wanted to connect that with Steven's question, which is how do you measure and iterate on user feedback to ensure continuous growth in a highly competitive market like such as the dating app?
Yeah.
Not we don't necessarily need to tailor the answer just for the dating app market, but yeah.
I'll talk maybe in general. So the question is, how do you measure and iterate on user feedback to ensure like continuous growth? I think the first thing is, many times if you're picking something to like solve for, it most likely is a pattern that multiple types of users are experiencing. So we don't pick up something that's like an edge case problem, but we pick up something that's like a prevalent among like a good cohort of our users. And especially if you're able to segment them and tag them within the app, that becomes even more easier. Like in this case, new versus returning is like easier to tag. So once we do that, then say we are shipping experiments or we are shipping optimizations for those particular cohort, like going back to our tailoring the experience point. And then you always, like, for example, if returning users were churning, like maybe they were churning in maybe X number of days or X number of weeks. And as a company, we already established metrics of what's like a good time frame for users to like stay active, right? So then we are like, okay, for this cohort, they were typically churning after so many days. But with this particular optimization that we have launched, are they staying on in the app for longer, right? If they are staying on in the app for longer, then we kind of like are going in the right direction in terms of like solving some of the pain points and feedback that we got from our users. If that's not happening, then I think we need to go back and reevaluate if our tactic was true, or if our hypothesis was true. So I think we do that like constantly, and the more we do it, the better we get at like being more right and being more on point in terms of like launching the right experiences.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. And I want to shift gears a little bit. Like we have addressed it a little bit of like more technical questions or in the field questions. And if we zoom out a little bit, and I want to start with one from the audience, so from the comment section. So I guess a pretty good one to start would be how one from Alfredo, which is how do you start a growth team in a company that doesn't have one from the start? So I know that this is a common like challenge that a lot of like the community members actually face, to build the mindset, to build a page, to create a need. So I would like to hear like from someone who has been in different roles in the growth and different stages of the company maturity. So yeah, how would you go about it?
It's a very interesting question. I will state or disclaim that I have not worked in a company that did not have a growth team and then had to build it. So
Yeah.
whatever I state could is going to be based on whatever I have seen, like among my colleagues or my network, and what my POV would be based on my experience in growth, but it may or may not be applicable to this very specific like instance. I think building a growth team, I've seen like multiple companies do it a different way, but I think the first step I like to do is there is always like one growth leader. It's always good to have like one person who is starting to like, figure out like what is required for that particular company to grow, like going back to the different stages that we spoke about. So if it's a startup, I'm assuming, or if even if it's a mature company without a growth team, I think the first step would be to understand what is the stage and maturity of my product and my company. What is like the market dynamics, like within my competitors or other people already employing like growth tactics that's working, that's actually giving them an edge over my company, right? And then what's like the complexity like of my product, like is it super simple like to understand, or like it's like a very complicated product that if I have to like really educate the user so they can reach the aha moment, they can reach engagement, like. So maybe first understanding the lay of the land for your business, your company, and then figuring out, okay, given this, what are the different growth tactics that might work for my company that I want to employ, and almost like start by sort of running experiments across different tactics. So maybe freemium model, like, I'm just throwing out some growth levers here. Again, you need to evaluate what fits for your company, but referrals, like onboarding and activation. And then once you have like kind of run some of these experiments, you kind of get a sense of, okay, what's working for my company, what's not. And now it's time to double down and scale in the areas that's actually working. And that's when you start like growing a team. So maybe you need a
Yeah.
product person to like grow that space really deeply. Maybe you need a marketer to talk about that product and to, sort of like educate the users about that product like better. Then maybe
Yeah.
you need obviously your engineering team to build whatever the experiments we need to run. You need an analyst to like be really focused on the goals and metrics for that particular like stream of work. So
Yeah.
then you kind of start growing like your growth team. But oftentimes I feel sometimes I've seen like companies have this growth team before you've actually figured out what's the charter of growth, or
Yeah.
what is it that works for your company in terms of growth. So I think that's a very important step.
I couldn't agree more. And like my 2 cents on the topic, as someone who has helped like a few companies actually build their growth operations from scratch, is that even though like once growth is up and running, you have kind of like empowered the basis of the pyramid, right? Like everyone can suggest ideas, the growth team will run them out. We're kind of like democratizing access to everyone. But to actually like start everything out, we usually go from a top-down approach. So if my C-level and the highest level in the hierarchy doesn't have a clear picture of what growth actually means and what comes with it, meaning some tests will fail. So if you're addressing that the same way that you are actually measuring like marketing or product or sales success, you're gonna have some tension down the flow. So I would start like building the mindset of the C level and VP level, working with them before getting to the basis. But yeah. Cool. And like we talked about like so Alfredo, thanks for asking. Alfredo asked mostly about like starting a growth team in a company that doesn't have a growth team, right? What about like a person, someone who wants to get into growth? So Atisha asked if someone wants to enter a growth road today, what topics they should start exploring and mastering?
Yeah. That's a very interesting question. So someone wants to enter a growth role, what topics they should start exploring and mastering? I think the most important thing I would say is the mindset, right? And that takes a while to build. And going back to this question where I think it was at the start, traditional versus growth PM, I think the main difference is in the mindset. You're almost like, I would say you need to think like a business owner. Imagine this is your company, you have started that company, and you have real like things like, hey, I'm not getting new users, I need to get new users. Hey, my users are coming, but no one is actually using the product beyond the first time, right? Like getting to that mindset and is like super important. But I think couple of actionable things that you could do. I would say first is try to understand what a growth role entails. So if you're already a product person, like try to understand maybe what are some of the skills that is super transferable because you're a product person versus what are some of these additional things that you need to develop as a growth PM. So one way you could do that is to basically understand different growth frameworks. Like, you can think about like, okay, how is onboarding important? How is activation important? What are some of the growth loops that, different companies have like actually employed, and why is that growth loop important? And you have a lot of resources online to be able to do that. Like Reforge, as I mentioned, is like one of the things. Even Growth Hackers community has like a lot of good resources that I've seen. And you can also like reach out to different people in the growth space to like better understand, okay, what are some of like the different growth levers that has worked for their business, and sort of start from there. So at least you understand what is the lay of the land in a growth role. And then once you have like that basic information, it's all about I like to do this is when you pick up any product that you're using, kind of observe, oh, okay, referrals was something that is used commonly in growth, in many of the growth products to drive new users. Okay, now I'm using this product. How does the referral program look like? How do I send invites, and what do I get in return? Like, kind of like really noticing how different apps have done it really gives you that first hand experience for you to like start building that knowledge. And then
Yeah.
once you do that, I think then you can figure out within your company, do you have a growth role, or are there like roles in other companies where you could be a good fit because maybe you work in that industry or in that product domain, and you're like just wanting to shift from being like just a core PM to a growth PM. Many times it's easier when you're in that domain, that industry, and then you're only pivoting to growth because you already understand the core product really well. So it's just one change, so you're more likely to get that opportunity if you obviously can sort of demonstrate that you understand what growth space looks like and what are some of the effective levers that you could employ for that company.
Yeah, I love that. And like a warning, like after you land in a growth position, you would never, like, using an app for the first time would never be the same because you're constantly searching, all right, let me see what they want to do here, like how to invite users. So that experience, it will never feel the same. You start looking at that with different eyes. But
And
great.
actually,
Yeah.
I can also throw in like some resources I use in order to like to stay up to date on growth frameworks, how different people
Yeah,
are with
would
the
love
different
that.
companies. So maybe I'll put it in the comments after this webinar so everyone can access it.
Yeah, we can leave on the footnotes. Like after the session ends, it will be available in the community. The recording will be available in the community. I'll send this contact, LinkedIn profile, and every like note or tool that we mentioned today. We'll also release it there, right? I want to take another one last one from the like the comment section, and I'm just gonna put it in a different way. It was asked by Woods from Boston, which is like, you mentioned in the beginning, the structure that the growth team actually kind of belongs or reports to the product team in your case. The question is like, where do you draw the line between what belongs to marketing and what belongs to growth?
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
So to confirm, like the way it works in ours is actually these functions don't report to product. Only product reports to product, marketing reports to
got it,
marketing,
got it.
data science reports to data science, and it's just at an initiative level. Like we have one product person, like for example for user growth, we have a couple of data science folks, and we have like a data science manager who is like, say, my counterpart, and we have like a marketing manager or product marketing manager who is my counterpart. And we just like at an initiative level decide, okay, we need to have one product person, one data science person, one marketing person who will work on this initiative or this experiment together.
Yeah,
So that's
got
how
it.
it is structured. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So kind of like the lines are kind of already drawn, but it's like when we are designing the experience or the experiment, then, we have different functions that
Yeah,
essentially come together with their own expertise to make this a success.
got it. Got it. Perfect. Right. So I want to go to the like From my personal experiences, the two biggest reasons why growth teams actually fail is one is the lack of culture. So we mentioned about that when like launching a growth team, and the second one is lack of strategy. So my question is, what is the hardest part, or how do you guys go? Like, it's actually Subhasri. I might be pronouncing that like not correctly, but what is the hardest part of defining 0 to 1 strategy, or what is the process that you guys go through to decide what you're going to be working on?
Yeah. So I think you asked two things, right? One is what's the difficult part of it, and
Yeah,
then
the
what.
hardest part, and how do you guys go about it? Yeah.
Okay. So, in terms of the hardest part of defining 0 to 1 strategy, I would say is the business is ever evolving. So, you could have like a solid strategy that might have worked like today, looking like 1 year down the road, but the market would have totally shifted in another direction that your strategy may no longer be true. So you may need to change it. And that sometimes could be extremely challenging because you spend all this time defining what the strategy is. And then market shifts or the business like landscape totally shifts. And then your team has to like totally now adjust to another strategy, right? So that could get difficult at times. Obviously, like, as a growth team, one of the tenets that we have, or I like to always like propose, is for us to be as agile as possible and not be married to any strategy or tactic. Because at the end of the day, we are experimenting different things and we will learn new things as we go. So we should be able to have that mindset that, okay, let me do what's good for the business, what's good for the user, and not be married to like a strategy. So I think if that mindset is there, this difficult part becomes little easier to handle. In terms of like the process, in terms of defining strategy, I think it is pretty much like what I'd stated in one of the other questions of like understanding what stage your company is in and what are maybe some of the opportunities where we are facing challenges or there is a lot of opportunity or room to grow, and being like, okay, in this, like maybe in the next 6 months we really need to focus on a retention, or in the next 3 months we really need to focus on driving users from this segment of users, right? So once we have that goal defined and we have aligned that with the business, then we work backwards on, okay, what is the current state, what is not working, and then like having different like sort of hypotheses on, okay, if we do this, we can expect like our user base to grow by X. But we can't put all our eggs in one basket. So we can't just do one experimentation. So we try to do like multiple experimentation with different like confidence level and different like impact levels. And then we sort of try to ship that out. And we want to make sure that at least like few of them work so we are able to hit our goals. And for the ones that don't, we like kind of learn why it didn't work and we kind of pivot or like optimize that further. So I think that's like the overall sort of process. And what I like to do is we can't define strategy in a silo. Strategy needs to go with what the core product strategy is. So we can't be as a growth team sit like in one room and be like,
Yeah.
okay, all growth team, what's our growth strategy? It needs to be like, okay, as a business, what's our 2 year vision? Okay, as a product, where are we going? What are the new capabilities? Like, what is it that we plan to ship as part of our roadmap, and then kind of align your growth strategy to sort of like propel or put fuel that entire like
Yeah.
sort of like strategy for the business that we have like aligned on.
Yeah, we should be breaking silos not only when we need cross collaborations to get done, but also in coming up with strategies as well.
Exactly.
Cool. And like, I know there's a lot to unpack when we talk like about the strategy, the process itself, the framework. So I love like, is it correct to assume like the end result of the strategy, like once you decide the strategy, it's pretty much a metric, a success metric for each of the tribes or growth teams that you guys have, right? Then you work backwards to come up with hypotheses. Is that it?
Exactly. So you have a strategy that is, obviously you first need to have a goal, right? Like what are
Yeah.
you trying to achieve? And then you have a strategy to meet that goal. And every strategy will have like multiple tactics to achieve that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
for example, if I have to give an example, very high level, say your goal is to drive new users, right? And then your strategy is, okay, I'm going to like drive new users from like this particular US market and for this particular like user segment that is
Mm-hmm.
niche and that my product is actually catering to.
Got it.
But in order to achieve them, I have multiple tactics. I can employ a referral program. I can employ an incentivization program. I can employ like if it's product led, like growth. Like I need to make my onboarding and registration like really really solid so I can convert more users, right? And then if we are also working with marketing, okay, my marketing, I need to work with my marketing team so they can have like an entire marketing tactic to
Yeah.
like sort of advertise this product, create brand awareness and consideration, right?
Yep.
So that is like the different tactics. And then we have to prioritize, okay, given for my product, given say the maybe the brand awareness is really, really high. So maybe I don't need to invest in that much. I'll not get much yield from it. So maybe I'm considering the other three options and I'll see, okay, what's the impact I expect to get if I'm employing this program? What's my confidence level to do it and what might be some of the risks, and then we do a prioritization. Okay, based on this, maybe these are the top two that we feel we want to employ like maybe in the next 3 months or 6 months,
Yeah.
and run experiments around it. And then for each of those also we might have different experiments within those tactics in order to validate like what actually works the best.
I
So that's
love it. Yeah, yeah. So you guys use kind of like a version of the IC score, but instead of easiness, it's kind of like the risks associated to that.
I call it like the rice score. Yeah, it's risk,
Rice.
impact,
Yes.
confidence and effort.
Love it. All right, great. Yeah, cool. So you guys define a strategy, then you can come up with like experiments, ideas, and the tactics that you're gonna roll out. Collaborating with different teams, you prioritize based on the RICE score, and now you're getting to the trenches of actually running the experiments, right? Once an experiment is successful, so prior to that, like prior to actually analyzing results, let's say that you run an experiment. Do you do that with like a small cohort of users and then you amplify the exposure of that experiment? Or do you go about like, let's just put it online? How does that work? And I know that there are cases and cases and experiments, but just like overall, the deployment of an experiment, how does that work?
Yeah. Ideally, when we run experiments, we want to have minimum exposure, but enough to get significant and confident results, right? Many times, like we call this a minimum detectable effect in experiments, where what's the minimum change I want to be able to detect in order to confidently say that whatever results or lifts or drops I'm seeing is because of the change that I made as part of this experiment, as part of the variant, right? So typically like we try to keep the audience as small as possible but enough for us to very confidently say that this result is because of this change. So I think that's where we work with our data science team to figure out what that audience size looks like. The second thing would be the time frame for which I want to run, and it also depends on the metric that I want to measure. Retention is a very hard metric to measure. You can't run it for 2 weeks and be like, okay, my retention is good or bad. But say if you have a metric that's more like, for example, for referral program, say if it's like, okay, how many people are actually like inviting their friends to like join, for example, that's a more easier metric to measure, and it might require a shorter time frame for us to understand the impact. So it goes back to what my metric is that I'm measuring, and we try to keep our success metric for these experiments more like metrics that we can directly impact versus like this end metric that we want to like impact that's like a little longer, it'll take a much longer time to like understand the effects. So once we define the metric, that will like kind of tell us this is the audience size you need and this is the time frame for which you need to run that experiment, and then we kind of see the impact and then go from there.
I love it. How do you say the concept? It's minimum.
It's
Uh,
minimum detectable effect. It's essentially like what's the change, like minimum percentage change you want to see,
yeah,
like in your whatever percentage drop in an experiment, to confidently be able to say that the effects that you're seeing is because of the change that you made as part of the experiment.
I love it. I love it. All right. And one last question from me. I know that we have like 4 minutes left, but All right, so you guys ran the experiment. It might have worked, it might not have worked. So what happens next? Like, if it works, is it like goes directly to a rollout? Does someone approves it? Do you guys promote it worldwide? Like, and the reason why I'm asking is like one of our past guests is to mention that the two most like underrated skills for a growth person is politics, or knowing who, like where to go inside the organization to get help, and the second one is cheerleading. So once an experiment works, you should just go about it and tell everyone. So I would love to hear like what happens in your case.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I think like making a decision post an experiment is always like very interesting. And it's not as simple as, oh, this experiment worked, it moved this metric positively, let's go ship it out. What if 5 experiments worked and they're all in the same domain? Like, would you just ship those 5 things to the user and make it conflict with each other? No, right? Like, you need to understand A, for what cohort did it work? Maybe it was successful for certain demographic, but it was not for another. So it doesn't make sense for us to roll it out to all when it only worked for some. So like we need to understand who it worked for. Secondly, we need to understand like, okay, if I roll this out, what's the implication to my user experience, right? Because maybe I have 5 other things that's going on for the user, and this is the 6th thing that I'm adding. So does it sit well in like an holistic experience? And at growth we face that a lot, like 3 experiments work, but 3 of them, if like it might be conflicting if you roll it out to one user. So we need to understand, okay, how does it tie into my user experience? Do I need to like tweak it a little bit if I'm actually going to do this as a rollout? Which geos do I need to like expand this into? Maybe some geos this might actually be more riskier to roll out versus other geos. So like we need to do all that decision making and then frame a recommendation as a team. Sometimes we are like, you know what, this worked, but this is not the final experience. Like this is very rudimentary. So maybe we need to like maybe do few more optimizations before we are ready to like totally launch it. So we have all these considerations that we have deep conversations on with the data science team, with and the
Yeah,
product team, and then we kind of come up with a recommendation and readout. And then depending on your organizations, we have few levels of approval, and then we are like, okay, let's get this approved, and then we'll go. Typically, the ones that are more riskier needs higher level approvals. The ones that are not risky is more within like our pod. So I think that's how we kind of tackle experimentation results and next steps.
I love it. All right. So I know that we have 1 minute left. I'm just gonna take like one last question from the audience from the comment section, and then we wrap things up. So this one came from Bill. Do you have a framework to value different types of users based on demographics and or engagement behavior?
Got it. And when you say like value different types of users, like their value to the product, like if it's more valuable to retain them versus other users, is what I'm guessing.
Yeah, let's see if Bill is. All right, you can ask like
Yeah.
the
I
way
can
that
I
you
can
prefer.
answer
Yeah,
it based on my interpretation of this
yeah,
question.
yeah.
So it's like, do you have a framework to value different types of users based on demographics or engagement behavior? Um,
All
to
right,
bring
so
them on. Okay. I think I think yes, but again depends on, I would say, the product. For some products, having certain demographic of users could be valuable to the entire ecosystem of users, right? So in that instance, if that user cohort is like not coming into the product or retaining, it's actually detrimental to all of the other users. That may or may not be true. It totally depends on the product. If that's the case, then yes, I think we will need to like understand what's the long-term value or LTV, as I mentioned, of that particular cohort of users. And as I mentioned, when we are in the growth stage, many times we try to focus just on volume, but I think the quality of users is equally important, of how these quality of users, they might be your power users, they might be your high intent users, they might be the users who are the ones that are making the experience of others better. And so we do need to invest in bringing those kind of users through the door and making sure that they have a really sticky experience within the product to like sort of grow the LTV of the entire like user base. So yes, the question is, we do employ ways. So the first step is to identify those cohorts and to understand what's the correlation of like retaining them or engaging them to like our overall say retention or other business metrics that matter to us. And then depending on that, kind of understand, okay, currently do we have a dearth of those users or do we have an excess of those users? If you already have an excess, it's great. But if it's less, then we want to like think about again strategies of how we can bring that specific cohort of users um, into
Yeah,
our platform.
makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Sandy. So, one last note before we wrap things up. On October 9th, we are hosting a webinar with Peter Lang, who has acquired like 18 different marketing agencies since 2019. So, he's going to be talking about growth strategies for agency owners and M&As, not AMAs, M&As on October 7th. So, we'll drop the link on the footnotes. The recording will be available on the community, so everyone can hop in and still watch it. Sandy, thank you so much for joining us. This has been super insightful. I feel like I could spend the rest of the afternoon just asking questions. So really love it. Any last notes that you want to leave with the audience, and if someone wants to connect and reach out to you?
Yeah, firstly, thank you to the audience for all the thoughtful questions. It definitely made me also think and reflect on all the experiences I've had. So thank you for being so engaging and thoughtful. And yeah, if you want to reach out to me, please you can send me a LinkedIn connect request. I go by Sandhya Ganesh on LinkedIn.
Also, thank you again, Sandhya. Thanks everyone for tuning in. See you guys next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.